On May 12, 1945, the book The Three Railway Engines was published and would spawn a whole series of children's books that would change the world forever. We have all come to love and respect these stories for what they've become over the last 77 years, and the lore that has been built up because of it. But the question always lingers, what if this happened? Or what if this didn't happen? Etc. In this video, we're going to be going over some of the what if questions regarding the Railway series books, and how it could have changed the course of the series that we've come to know and love. Welcome to the Railway series What If. Let's begin. Now, this is an idea that I'm sure a lot of people have actually thought of before. What if Douglas never actually escaped to Sodor with Donald? Well, this would mean a lot of things. First of all, the plot of the twin engines and the whole premise of the twin engines would obviously be heavily different. This would also mean that the Northwestern Railway's number 10 would probably be a completely different class of engine. And probably the biggest difference that this would make is Donald's character would probably be quite different as a result of this actually being true. Donald's character, at least in the first book that he appears in, would definitely be filled with tons of regret over not being able to save his brother. However, I like to imagine that maybe over the course of the Railway series, he goes through this sort of character arc where he eventually learns to accept his brother's fate, hoping that maybe things turned out good for him. As for Douglas himself, he would have either unfortunately been scrapped, or there could have been some sort of happy ending where he gets preserved by a heritage railway and now spent the rest of his life pulling heritage trains, sort of like his brother A28. Maybe he runs alongside him on the same heritage line. Who knows? Now here's one that I'm not sure a lot of people have ever thought about before. Now this would have to mean that the S&M were actually fairly financially stable enough to actually go through with this. Also, because of the fact that they were more financially stable, that would mean that they would be able to afford better materials to make the bridge, at least better materials for the time period. But what would this mean for the S&M? Well, due to the fact that they would be getting a lot more money from mainland services, they would be able to afford much bigger and stronger engines, at least bigger and stronger engines that were suitable enough for that time period. Obviously, that they would wear out over time, but for the time period, they would be fine. But in terms of the Northwestern Railway, I personally don't think too much would change. I'm sure the three railways would still amalgamate, and the Northwestern Railway would still become a thing. The only difference, I guess, is that the Northwestern wouldn't exactly need to build a bridge to the mainland because, well, it's already there. Though it would probably have to be severely overhauled. So yeah, to be honest, I don't think a lot would change here. But it is still an interesting thought. So what if Edward actually took Gordon's advice and was preserved? Well, first of all, this would mean that they would have to get a new engine to help out on the Brendan branch. As for Edward himself, he would either spend the rest of his life pulling slower stopping trains, or he would be placed in a museum. Now this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So for those who don't know, during World War II, the Scarlet Railway went through financial struggles, hence why they couldn't exactly maintain their engines, who were at this point now over 70 years old. Well, what if things got so bad to the point where they eventually had to close? Well, first of all, this would mean that slate would no longer be a booming industry on Sodor. Secondly, Scarlet and RWS would more than likely be placed in their old sheds until someone would buy them. For them, they would either spend the rest of their lives in their old sheds, or would be found by somebody and they would be preserved in more than likely a museum. Though this would also mean that Stewart and Falcom would spend an extended amount of time rusting away in an old siding at the Peel Godred Aluminum Company until someone would buy them. And lastly, this would mean that the Scarlet Railway would just fall into old Sudrian legend, which honestly is kind of a cool concept. Here's another interesting one. This one was actually inspired by an idea that user Cody's Railway had, where all the engines had to be painted into BR colors during nationalization. But what would this actually mean for the Northwestern Railway if they were forced to go along with BR's standards? Well, this would mean primarily two things. One, all the issues that would happen during nationalization and a little bit afterwards would happen on the Northwestern Railway, thus causing a lot of conflict. This would also mean that the Northwestern Railway would sort of be forced to go along with Dr. Beeching's Modernization Act, which would most definitely lead in scrap and diesels taking over Sodor. This is a case of, whilst this is a good idea, I'm kinda glad that it's not actually true. So what if Sir Topham Hatt ended up just saying, alright, screw this, I don't want to have to deal with this piece of shit, send him away? Well, obviously, Sir Topham Hatt would have to get a new engine to replace Henry. In particular, I'm thinking a Stanier Black 5, because, well, you know. But this one would go under a completely different identity, and maybe even a different livery. Whilst this might seem pretty insignificant to some others, including myself, this would kind of change the series in ways that we probably wouldn't want. Again, another cool idea, but probably best if it was just left at such. What if Sir Topham Hatt and his family never visited the Wisbech and Upwell tramway? This is exactly what would happen. As for the Farquhar branch line, they would either have to buy a tram engine, or they would actually have to install cow catchers and side plates on Thomas, which honestly would be pretty damn funny. This idea actually comes from my good buddy the Midland engine. What if Thomas never left the yard? Well, first of all, Sir Topham Hatt would purchase an engine to run the Farquhar branch line, which in my head would be a J50 because, reasons. This would also probably mean that Percy and Duck either would not have come to the island at all, or they would have come at much later dates. For example, Percy would probably be purchased to help rebuild the Knapford Harbor, and Duck would probably be purchased to help run the Arlesborough branch. And Thomas would more than likely not be that much of a significant character. It's kind of strange how something seemingly so insignificant in a story can dictate how the rest of the franchise is going to be. Finally, the question that a lot of Railway series fans have pondered. What if Sir Topham Hatt did get his Robinson Atlantic? Henry would actually be a success on the railway and wouldn't suffer from a lot of his problems that he did in the original books. This would also mean that he wouldn't need to be sent to Crewe to get rebuilt. Gordon would more than likely still arrive given the fact that he's a huge Express Pacific locomotive, but Henry would definitely be on the Express a lot more often. And because of the fact he would be able to pull the Express, he would probably end up becoming a lot like Gordon. Very, very boastful and full of himself, completely changing the stubborn, grouchy Henry that we know in the books. And Henry honestly would not have as big of a character arc as he does in the original books. In fact, he probably would barely have one at all. But most importantly, if Henry was an Atlantic, we would not have the pleasure of having this legendary line from Sir Topham Hatt in the iOS book. And that was the Railway series What If. A series of questions and ponders that I'm sure most railway series fans have thought of over the years. This was really fun to put together for an anniversary special, considering the fact that I've, never really done a proper anniversary special throughout my time in the fandom. I figured that this could probably be a good first start. Now, I will be honest though, I do have a lot more ideas that I still need to fully iron out and develop, most of which I have not shared in this video, which is the reason that I will more than likely make a part 2 to this series. But in the meantime, I want to know, is this something that genuinely interests you guys? And if it is, then I would definitely recommend you leave your ideas in the comments below. Maybe they'll be used in the next video. Who knows? Until then, this has been Talium Studios, saying goodbye and peace.